Hi everyone, so this is day 15 of the 42-day AS Economics Revision Challenge, and today we are about to do public goods. We say public goods have two features. One, they are non-rival, and second, they are non-excludable. Non-rival means consumption by one person. Let me write this. Consumption by one person will not leave less for another. What do we mean by consumption by one person will not leave less for another? It means that if I consume, for example, street light, by going under that, it won't mean less of it will be available for another. So street light is a good example of public good because it's non-rival, as opposed to, let's say, if you look at a chocolate cake, for example, if you eat one slice of a chocolate cake, less of it will be available for somebody else. So non-rival means consumption by one person will not leave less for another, while non-excludable means that it is not possible to exclude payers, those who pay, from non-payers. What do we mean by this? Well, basically, if somebody pays for street light and somebody does not pay for street light, the one who does not pay for street light, you can't exclude that person from consuming street light. It's difficult or impossible for us to charge for street light. So that's another feature that happens. So non-rival and non-excludable good, we say, is called a public good. Another way we look at non-excludability is the idea that if there is a good which is non-excludable, then once you provide that good, you can't stop anyone from benefiting the good. Like, for example, once the street light is provided, it's difficult for us to stop people from consuming it or stop people from benefiting from it because it's provided. Another good example could be national defense. Like if national defense, if you look at it, it is protecting our borders, and one could argue this that it is also non-excludable because once provided, anyone who lives in the country will benefit from it. You can't stop people from consuming it. Similarly, it's non-rival, which means if more people come in a country, let's say from some tourists are coming in the country, they automatically get provided. It's not consumption by one person who will leave less for another. We also look at this in terms of a table, which is a useful table for us to remember because it helps us to categorize our goods. So let me make that table. So what I'm going to do is basically on one side I'm going to write rival and non-rival, and on the other side I'm going to write excludable and non-excludable. If a good is rival and excludable, we basically call that good to be a private good. A private good that is bought and sold in the market and functions pretty well when it comes to buying and selling of the good. What the one thing we want to look at is that a private good is both rival and excludable. For example, a chocolate cake. So if you look at a chocolate cake, a chocolate cake is both rival and excludable. Why? Because rival means consumption by one person will leave less for another. So chocolate cake does go less or just reduces in size or quantity if one person consumes it. So for example, if I consume a slice of cake, less of it will be available for everyone else. It's also excludable basically because whoever pays for it will get the good. So if a good is both rival and excludable, we call it a private good. But if a good is basically non-rival and non-excludable, which means we're looking at non-rival and non-excludable, we call such a good to be a pure public good. A pure public good could be, for example, national defense, right, as we mentioned earlier, or for example, your the street light that we mentioned, All of these goods have this feature of being public because they are both non-rival and non-excludable. Non-rival because consumption by one person will not leave less for another, and non-excludable means that once you provide this good, you can't stop people from consuming it. It's difficult to exclude people from consuming it. You can't charge a price for it as a result of that. A good which is basically excludable and non-rival, we need to look at these categories as well. These are what we call quasi-public goods. Quasi-public goods. I'm going to talk about this as well in a little while. In fact, the good which is rival and non-excludable is also called quasi-public. Quasi means that they're semi-public, not purely public. Some feature of them is basically not public. So, for example, a good like which is rival and non-excludable means that consumption by one person will leave less for another, but once we provide it, it's very difficult for people to stop consuming the good. For example, your public park can come into this category. So, public park is a park which has a free entry. You don't really charge people for public park, but we know this that after some time, public park can become crowded, and therefore one could argue this that if it becomes crowded, it can affect the experience of another individual. It is rival after some point. Similarly, a public museum could be one where it could be rival once it gets overcrowded, but it's non-excludable. Anyone can come without paying any money. You can't stop anyone from consuming the good. On the other hand, when you look at non-rival and excludable, we are also calling it quasi-public. Well, a good example of this could be cable television. So what is the feature that cable television has? And the answer is just that once you pay for the cable television, you get that cable television connection. For example, like World Call, or for example, any TV service that you want to sort of get. But also once it's provided, it's non-rival. I mean, one person watches in the house, 5 people watches in our house, the whole neighborhood watch your cable television by coming to your house and watching it on your TV. Nobody can stop it. So it is both, it is excludable, so there is some part which is private, but it's non-rival, which is some part which is public. So that's an important table for us to understand, because they can ask us questions about a particular good, and we need to figure out whether it's rival or excludable. There's one more feature that I want to talk about public goods, which can also be part of our discussion. That sometimes we call public goods to be non-rejectables. Non-rejectables are those goods which we can't reject. What do we mean by this? So, for example, a street light is provided right outside my house or in the street where I live, and let's say I don't want to use your street light. I reject it. But the problem would be that I won't be able to reject it because I, no matter what, have to use it whenever I crosses it or whenever my car go under it. So, the idea that the public goods are non-rejectable means that you can't reject them once they are provided because they are there. Like similarly, national defense. If you're unhappy with your, for example, armed forces, but you live in a country for that matter, you can't help it because it's what we call a public good which is non-rejectable. So once provided, you can't reject it. It's another feature of a public good that we need to remember. So what leads to the non-rivalry and non-excludability? And the problem that comes from for public goods is that there is what we call a free rider problem that comes about because of the non-excludable nature of the good. So if we are not able to charge any consumer or stop any consumer from consuming that good who hasn't paid for the good or who does not want to pay for the good, then the problem will be that once the good is provided, you can't prevent anyone from enjoying the good, and therefore no one is willing to pay a price for the good. So we say this, that for public goods there is no price. And the problem why there is no price is because there is no willingness to pay. So there is no willingness to pay. And this lack of willingness to pay will mean that the private sector will not provide this good. So the private sector will not find it profitable, and that's why we call this as a market failure. So the market forces of demand and supply are unable to provide a good, which is important, but people are not willing to pay for it. So that's the biggest problem when it comes to public goods. Because of the fact that they're non-revenant, non-excludable, it makes it impossible for the firms to charge for the good, and therefore there is no market for public goods. So how does government go about solving this problem? And we say government can basically undertake provision. They could provide the good themselves by raising taxes from the society and undertake provision, which means you can see the street light, the national defense, all of these are provided by the government for free, and the way they fund for these goods is by taxation.